Most history channels that I've watched on YouTube, when they talk about Africa, they have a general overview of what happened in Africa. In fact, most of the time, they completely gloss over any of the achievements made by these Africans. So, in order for us to get a full view of what happened, we have to look into eyewitness accounts that detail different civilizations, and we will choose the 1500s as this has some of the most extensive eyewitness accounts. Here we will choose Duarte Barbosa, and the reason we will choose him is because he was very interested in what happened, and he details multiple accounts in Africa. And these accounts mimic some of the other writers who wrote in completely different languages and wrote for completely different purposes. By fusing these different views and cutting out the fat, we can get a full picture of what exactly happened in Africa at this time. Now, in the 1500s, there was definitely something happening in Africa that was new, which was that the entire continent was starting to be populated in a very dense way, meaning that no matter where you go, there is people. Whereas before, there were many nomadic people who could just travel from one side of Africa to the other. And in fact, they did multiple times. But now, tribes like the Bantu people and Mamluks and all these other people from North Africa and Southern Africa make it impossible for you to move freely without running into someone. But this is what Duarte had to say. So, first, he describes an island in which there are civilized people. Proceeding further along this coast, beyond the Cape of San Sebastian, towards India, there are certain islands hard by the mainland, which they call the Great Hickus. And on the mainland, pertaining thereto, are certain settlements of Moors, who have dealings with the heathens of the mainland, and trade with them. On these Hickus is found much ambergris, which the Moors gather. It is of good quality, and they sell it on the other lands. They find also great store of pearls and small seed pearls, which are found under the sea in oysters. Yet they know not how to collect nor how to fish for them. What they get is by roasting the oysters, and the seed pearls, which are left, are spoilt and burnt. No doubt they could be got there and good, if they but knew how to take them and how to fish, as they do in other parts, of which I shall speak further on. Leaving the great Hickus and proceeding to the side of a bay where stands Sofala, a fortress which in the king of Portugal possesses here, near to which much gold is found at 17th or 18th leagues. Therefrom are certain rivers which from islands in the mist. These they call the Lesser Hickus, wherein are some settlements of Moors who trade with the heathen of the mainland. Their food is rice, millet, and flesh, and they bring it to Sofala in small boats. So I have to explain this. The Portuguese at this time, through Vasco da Gama, wanted to go to India, and on their way to India, they traveled around Africa and landed on the Cape of Good Hope, and then they traveled through other parts of Africa and went to India. On their way back, they detailed certain places in Africa in which the Portuguese king decided that it is right for him to take over, and he did take over. So it's been about 40 to 50 years since the Portuguese had taken over. So most of their influence has not had any real effect on this place as this person is writing. Going forward in the direction of India, after passing these Hyksos and 20 and 30 leagues from them, there is a river of no great size, upon which up the stream is a town of the Moors, which they call Sofala, nigh to which the king our Lord possesses a fort. These Moors have dwelt there for a long time by reason of the great traffic which they carried on with the heathen of the mainland. The Moors of this place speak Arabic and have a king over them who is subject to King our Lord. And the manner of their traffic was this: they came in small vessels named Zambucos from the kingdom of Kuala, Mombasa, and Melinda, bringing many cotton cloths, some spotted and others white and blue, also some of silk, and many small beads, gray and red and yellow, which things come to the said kingdoms from the great kingdom of Sambaya in other greater ships. And these wares the said Moors who came from Melinda and Mombasa purchased from others who bring from hither, and paid for in gold at such a price that these merchants departed well pleased, which gold they gave by weight. The Moors of Sofala kept these wares and sold them afterwards to the heathen of the kingdom of Benematapa, who came thither laden with gold, which they gave in exchange for the said clothes, without weighing it. These Moors collect also great store of ivory, which they find hard by Sofala, and this also they sell in the kingdom of Sambaya at 5 or 6 cruzados the quanticle. They also sell some ambergris, which is brought to them from Hyksos, and is exceeding good. These Moors are black, and some of them tawny. Some of them speak Arabic, but the more part use the language of the country. They clothe themselves from the waist down with cotton and silk cloths, and other cloths they wear over their shoulders, like capes and turbans on their heads. Some of them wear small caps dyed in grain, in checkers, and other woolen clothes in many tints, also camlets and other silks. Their food is millet, rice, flesh, and fish. In this river, as far as the sea, are many seahorses, which come out on the land to graze, which horses always move in the sea like fishes. They have tusks like those of small elephants in size, and the ivory is better than that of elephants, being whiter and harder, and it never loses color. In the country near Sofala are many wild elephants, exceeding great ounces, lions, deers, and many other wild beasts. It is a land of plains and hills, with many streams of sweet water. In this same Sofala, now of late, they make great store of cotton and weave it, and from it they make much white cloth. And as they know not how to dye it, or have not the needful dyes, they take the Kambaya cloth, blue or otherwise colored, and unravel them and make them up again, so that it becomes a new thing. With this thread and their own white, they make much colored cloth, and from it they gain much gold. This they did as a remedy after they had perceived that our people were taking from them the trade of the Zumbakis, and that they can only obtain goods through the hands of the factors whom the king, our Lord, has there in his factories and forts. Beyond this country, towards the interior, lies the great kingdom of Benematapa, pertaining to the heathen whom the Moors name Kafirs. They are black men and go naked, save that they cover their private parts with cotton cloth from the waist down. Some are clad in skin of wild beasts, and some, the most noble, wear capes of these skins with the tails which trail on the ground. As a token of the state and dignity, they leap as they go and sway their bodies so as to make these skins fly from one side to the other. They carry wooden swords thrust into scarabs, bound with much gold and other metals, worn on the left side, as with us, in cloth girdles which they make for this purpose of 4 or 5 knots, with hanging tassels to denote men of rank. They also carry assegais in their hands, and other carry bows and arrows of middle size, the arrows not so long as those of the English, and not so short as those of the Turks. The iron arrowhead are long and finely pointed. They are warlike men, and some too are great traders. Their women go naked, only covering their private parts with cotton cloth as long as they are unmarried. But when they are married, they throw other cloths across their breast. 15 or 20 days' journey inland is a great town called Zimbabwe, in which are many houses of wood. It pertains to the heathen, and the king of Benematapa often stays there. The road thereto goes inland from Sofala towards the Cape of Good Hope. In this town of Benematapa is the king's most usual abode, in a very large building, and thence the traders carry the inland gold to Sofala and give it unweighed to the Moors for colored cloths and beads, which are greatly esteemed among them, which beads come from Kambaya. As regards Benematapa, these Moors say that these gold comes from a place yet further away towards the Cape of Good Hope, from another kingdom subject to the king of Benematapa, who is a great lord with many kings under him. He is a lord of an exceeding great country, which runs far inland and also extends as well to the Cape of Good Hope and Mozambique. Rich presents are daily laid before him, which the other kings and lords send him, each according to his ability. These they carry uncovered on their heads through the town until they arrive at a very lofty house where the king is always lodged, and he sees them through a window, but they see him not. They only hear his voice. Afterwards, the king sends for a person who has brought him such and such a present, and soon dismisses him after he has been well entertained. The king always takes with him into the field a captain whom they call Sono, with a great band of warriors, and 5 or 6 thousand women who also bear arms and fight. With this army he goes about subduing kings who have risen or would rise against their lord. This king of Benematapa every year sends men of rank from his kingdom to all the seigneuries and places which he holds, to give them new fire, that he may know whether they are obedient to him. In this wise, each of these men, when he arrives at each town, has every fire put out, so that no one fire is left in the place. And when all are out, they all come to receive fire from his hand in token of the greatest friendship and obedience, so much so that the place or town which is not willing to do so is forthwith accused of rebellion. Thereupon the king at once sends his aforesaid captain, who either destroys the sovereignty or reduces it to subjection. This captain, with all his warriors, wheresoever he wishes to stay, is fed at the cost of the town. Their provisions are millet, rice, and flesh. They also make much use of gingerly oil, swama or chwama. They call chwama, which leads into the inner country over against the kingdom of Benematapa, more than 170 leagues. In the month of the said river is a town whose king they call Mangal. By this river comes much gold from Benimatapa to this Moorish town, and from this river is formed another which goes to a town called Angoya, and it is here that the Moors have many almadas to convey cloth and much other merchandise from Angoya, and others to take abundance of gold and ivory thither. Angoya. Further on leaving this Chuama, 140 leagues from it, skirting the coast, is a very great town of Moors called Angoya, which has its own king. In it dwell many merchants who deal in gold, ivory, silk, and cotton cloths, and come by beads as those of Sofala were wont to do. Great English, bro. The Moors of Sofala, Mombasa, Melinda, and Kuala convey these wares in very small craft concealed from our ship, and in this wise they carry great store of provender, millet, rice, and flesh of diverse kinds. The natives thereof are some black and some tawny. They go bare from the waist up, and below it are clad in silk and cotton cloths, and they wear other cloths folded like cloaks on their shoulders. Some wear turbans on their heads, and others caps made of squares of silk cloth. They speak the native language of the country, that of the heathen, but some speak Arabic. At times these Moors obey the king our lord, but at other times, being far from our fortress, they become rebellious. Mozambique. Going forward towards India and leaving Angoya, there are 3 islands very near to the mainland, among which is a Moorish town called Mozambique, which has a very good haven, formerly the resort of the Moors who traded to Sofala and Chuama to repair their ships, as they found their good depth of water and wood and provisions among the Moors, water and wood and provisions among the Moors of the Isle of Mozambique was a sheriff who governed and judged them. These Moors are of the same tongue and have the same custom as those of Angoya. Here the king, our lord, has a fortress, so that the aforesaid Moors are under his rule and governance. And our ships now take in at this port water, wood, and provisions which are found in that land, and there they mend the ships that need it, in going as well as is in coming, and hence they send supplies to the Portuguese at Sofala, as well as many things which come from Portugal and from India also. On the mainland, appertaining to these islands, are many very great elephants. The land is inhabited by heathen who are like beasts, going naked and smeared with red clay. Their private parts are wrapped in strips of blue cotton cloth, with no other clothing. Their lips are bored with 3 holes, and in these they place bones with little stones and other little pendants. Going along the coast from the town of Mozambique, there's an island hard by the mainland, which is called Coelho, in which is a Moorish town with many fair houses of stone and mortar, with many windows after our fashion. very well arranged in streets with many flat roofs. The doors are of wood, well carved with excellent joinery. Around it are streams and orchids and fruit gardens with many channels of sweet water. It has a Moorish king over it. From this place they trade with Sofala, whence they bring back gold. And from here they spread all over Arabia. Felix, which henceforth we may call by this name, even though it is Ethiopia. For all the sea coast is well peopled with villages and abodes of Moors. Before the king, our Lord, sent out his expedition to discover India, the Moors of Sofala, Chuama, Angoya, and Mozambique were all subject to the king of Qualio, who was the most mighty king among them. And this town was great plenty of gold, as no ships passed towards Sofala without first coming to this island of the Moors. There are some fair and some black. They are finely clad in many rich garments of gold and silk and cotton, and the women as well. Also, with much gold and silver in chains and bracelets, which they wear on their legs and arms, and many jeweled earrings in their ears. These Moors speak Arabic and follow the creed of the Al Quran and have great faith in Mohammed. This town was also taken by force from its king by the Portuguese, as moved by arrogance. He refused to obey the king our Lord. There they took many prisoners, and the king fled from his island. And his highness ordered that a fort should be built there and kept it under his governments. Afterwards, he ordered that it should be pulled down as it's further on and advanced along the coast towards India. There is an isle hard by the mainland on which is a town called Mombasa. It is very fair place with lofty stone and mortar houses, well aligned in the streets. The wood is well fitted with excellent joiners' work. It has its own king, himself a Moor. Their women go very bravely attired with many fire garments of silk and gold in abundance. This is a place of great traffic and has a good harbor in which are always moored craft of many kinds and also great ships, both of those which come from Sofala and those which go hither, and others which come from the great kingdom of Kambaya and from Melinda, others which sail to the island of Zanzibar, and yet others of which I shall speak anon. This Mombasa is a land very full of food. Here are found many very fine sheep with round tails, cows and other cattle in great plenty, and many fowls, all of which are exceeding fat. There is much millet and rice, sweet and bitter oranges, lemons, pomegranates, Indian figs, vegetables of diverse kinds, and much sweet water. The men, therefore, thereof are oft times at war and but seldom at peace with those of the mainland, and they carry on trade with them, bringing thence great store of honey, wax, and ivory. The kings of the city refused to obey the commands of the king our Lord, and through this arrogance he lost it, and our Portuguese took it from him by force. He fled away, and they slew many of his people, and also took captive many, both men and women, in such sort that it was left ruined and plundered and burnt of gold and silver. Great booty was taken here, bangles, bracelets, earrings, and gold beads. Also, great store of copper with other rich wares in great quantity, and the town was left in ruins. Leaving Mombasa and journeying along the coast towards India, there is a fair town on the mainland lying along a strand which is named Melinda. It pertains to the Moors and has a Moorish king over it, the which place has many fair stone and mortar houses of many stories, with great plenty of windows and flat roofs after our fashion. The place is well laid out in streets. The folk are black and white. They go naked, covering only their private parts with cotton and silk cloth. Others of them wear cloths folded like cloaks and waistbands and turbans of many rich stuff on their heads. They are great barterers and deal in cloth, gold, ivory, and diverse other wares with the Moors and heathen of great kingdom of Cambaya. And to their haven come every year many ships with cargoes of merchandise, from which they get great store of gold, ivory, and wax. In this traffic, the Cambaya merchants make great profits, and thus on one side and on the other they earn much money. There is great plenty of food in the city, and diverse sort of fruit, inasmuch as there is here abundance of fruit, gardens, and orchards. Here too are plenty of round-tailed sheep, cows, and other cattle, and great store of oranges, also of hens. The king and people of this place ever were and are friends of the king of Portugal, and the Portuguese always find in them great comfort and friendship and perfect peace. And there the ships, when they chance to pass that way, obtain supplies in plenty. So this is a map of Africa showing the areas in which the Portuguese held, and you can see them because they're indicated by this green color. So Portugal over there at the corner above Africa, a bit of West Africa, a bit of southern West Africa, a bit of West Southern Africa, and East Africa, a bit of East Africa, mainly Mozambique, conquered by the Portuguese. You'll notice that they're all coastal areas, meaning that the Portuguese did not dare try to take over kingdoms that were more inland because they would be surrounded by people of different complexion, and they would easily identify them as the sole enemy that they need to crush. Congo was really unexplored until the 1700s, and there's a whole bunch of technologies, including rubber balls and rubber and all kinds of stuff that invaded or encompassed the lives of the people living there. And of course, trade from the coast has always been coming inland, and trade that came inland was coming outside. Many things that the Europeans and Asians got from Africa ended up in their abode. And I showed you that video that shows that Chinese porcelains and all these other things landed on Great Zimbabwe, which you can see down there. Zimbabwe is completely empty, meaning there hasn't been a shred of colonization. Keep in mind, no colonization of any kind, not Arab, not other black people, not Portuguese, not Dutch, not nothing. Another thing that would put this thing firmly into context is the view of what was happening in other parts of the world during the same time, and were they aware of these people at the same time. To check what period it would be, what we'd have to do is check when this was written. And as you can see, Duarte Barbosa died in 1521, which means that all of his writings were probably happening in the 1400s. This puts it in the Ming dynasty of China. In this dynasty, we do see certain animals from Africa making their way all the way to China, and you see them drawn on or painted on some of the paper from ancient China. This would also put it in the Sengoku period of Japan, which is the age of the warring states, given the fact that the first unifier of Japan was somewhere in the late 1500s. This means that the majority of Japanese history that most people are familiar with hadn't even started when most of this stuff was happening. Something you hear a lot is that there's absence of written record that details stuff about Africa. But if you consider the time period of Japan, they have about the, well, not the same, but they have a lot of written record from that era. And in this era, a lot of Africans picked up writing. And so there are other Africans, which I will read in the future, who detailed their self during these periods. But first, we have to go through the Portuguese because those are the people are most likely to believe and state that because they had an ulterior motive, they have no reason to make the Negro look that good. But look what has already been discussed here. First of all, we talked about the fact that in Zimbabwe, they arm the women and have them fight wars, as you saw in the reading. This is not uncommon amongst the Bantu, as I stated before. Bantu women, in some cases, they would be auxiliary, and in some cases, they would be frontline. Bantu women fought wars all the time, as long as there was a war. The majority of people who fought wars were obviously men, but there's a logic behind it, which is you would rather have a man or a woman who is willing to fight than a man who is forced to fight. Secondly, you notice how they're wearing very sophisticated clothing, cottons of all kind, which are dyed, and in some cases they're traded. In some cases they're taken from wild cotton and formed. And compare this to Japan again. Also, there was places that were wearing silks and stuff, probably from West Africa. But if you notice that the whole thing when you put a picture in your mind of what Africa must have looked like back then, it's a complete different picture. It would have been extremely colorful because of course Africans are obsessed with colors. You notice how the Zimbabweans were obsessed with beads, just like how the Zulus are obsessed with beads. The beads that they would have got from Great Zimbabwe. But you notice that these beads, they're very important, very venerated in this region. And those colors are really what they're going for because being very colorful is a sign of good looks, especially if you live in forests where dull colors can make you look like the background and not in cold environments. Gold, of course, they're plated with gold all over. They've got gold on their hair, they've got gold in their arms, gold all over. So the picture of what an African would have looked like back then, the majority of Africans, there are obviously tribes that just wore leather, which is fine because leather is still very comforting. The number of tribes that wore leather were smaller tribes. The bigger ones, and also they were aware of cotton, they just didn't wear it. The bigger ones are the ones that traded cotton and had bigger uses for it because they had the infrastructure. Lastly, if you compare China and Africa at that time, clearly they were aware of each other. And so things like coffee cups and teacups and all these other things, they would have made it all the way there. But not only that, the fact that they were valued tells you what type of life these people were living. Like the fact that they could value items like that instead of being like, nope, we want other stuff. The reason why beads were highly valued, and I've shown you this before, is because there's a whole literature, a whole writing system which they used to use using these symbols and beads and cottons and all this other stuff. So you can imagine how like Europeans valued paper. These people valued that. Like I said, in China, this is the time of the Ming. the final days of the Ming that didn't last that long. And it was only 100 years before this time that the Mongols took over most of Asia. So you can see how very old this time period we're talking about is. In Ethiopia, this is the time of Lalibela and their Christian areas. And remember, almost everyone in this area that I was talking about was Muslim or traditional African mythology, which they called heathens or kafre, meaning non believer. It's the same word as heathen. So you can see here that there's a difference, and the Ethiopians are a standout. They're a self governing location, which is a standout given the fact that almost everyone around them is a Muslim, from the Somalians to other places. But they, as the Abyssinians, held firm against other people. East African history, the Horn of Africa, that version of East Africa, is so deep that I cannot cover it in one video. But I will say one thing. You see multi story buildings in this region about the same time that you see them anywhere else in the world. In fact, I think they are older than a lot of the ones that happened in Europe. But multi-story buildings are there present in China, they're present in East Africa, which in East Africa they had a completely independent way of building them using very large like lock logs which hold on these beams that hold buildings so you can build on top of them. In fact, they have these pillars that represent the height of how big buildings they wanted to make. These were supposed to be showing how tall the skies would be or these buildings would be for the kings once they got to heaven, I guess.